Alright, my name's Ashley, and in this video we're going to talk about how to ace your podiatry medical school interviews. I just actually finished my interviews, and I feel like I have a lot that I've thought about recently about interviews that hopefully can be useful for you. So that's why we're making this video right now. So first off, like I said, I had a lot of thoughts, so I'm going to make kind of like a two-part video. In this video, we're going to talk about what the interviews look like in general, and then also how to answer their questions, especially the most important question, which we will talk about in a little bit. The second video I make will be kind of just tips and tricks generally about things you should and should not do during your interview and what you need to bring with you. So stay tuned for that video too, because there's a lot of red flags for professionalism that are really easy to avoid if you think about it. So, interviews. There's a lot of variation in interviews depending on the school you're interviewing with. I applied to 7 schools, and so I had 7 interviews. And I actually went to 2 of those in person, and then I did the other 5 online. Every single school is going to offer you an online interview because they know that most of us are not applying to ones that are in the same state that we live in currently or that are going to undergrad in. And so they're all going to offer you online. The only reason you should really worry about going to an in-person one is if you feel like it's a really good school and you're really interested in actually going there and you have the resources and means to. I don't know what your situation is. Maybe you are just finishing up a gap year and so you have some extra cash from all the work you've been doing, or maybe you have a spouse who works full-time. Whatever it is, if you have some extra money and you want to make sure that these schools are the ones that you want to go to, then I would definitely recommend going out to see 1 or 2 schools, or even more if you want, but I feel like 2 is a perfect number for me because I got to see 2 different schools in comparison to each other in person. Zoom interviews are awesome, but you don't really get a full campus tour that helps you see the full picture as well. So for example, when I went to my first interview in person, I hadn't really seen any pictures of the campus, but I walked in and I was like, oh, this is so awesome. And after our tour and the whole interview day, I was like so stoked. It's like, this school is awesome. I love the campus. I love the people I met. This was gorgeous. And then I went to my other one in person and I was floored, absolutely floored. In comparison to the first one that I went to, like the first one looked like a shack now because this other school that I went to was even more amazing. And I wouldn't have realized just the vast difference unless I had had that in-person comparison. And again, it's not all about just what the facility looks like, but it does kind of help you get a good vibe for the overall university, and it helps you get to meet more people on campus. And so just take that with a grain of salt. You can decide yourself whether an in-person interview or an online one is right for whatever you're working on. But for the online and the in-person, the actual interview is pretty much the same. Now, the interview is often kind of a full day event, or at least a couple hours. So make sure that you don't have something right after that you have to rush towards, so you are anxious about it the whole time, because that would not be good. They usually start the interview process with like a welcome, and they take roll, they make sure everyone's there that's going to be interviewed. Sometimes when I was on a Zoom interview, or even in-person interview, it was just me. And sometimes you're with 3 or 4 other people. It just kind of depends. And after that, they'll kind of do a welcome, and you will meet the dean or other faculty members. And then from there, they usually have a bunch of planned events for you to participate in, whether that's meeting with student ambassadors, having lunch, taking a campus tour. One of my in-person interviews, they literally took me in a car to one of their clinical facilities, and I got to meet some patients and like shadow a doctor for 10 minutes while I was there. That was pretty cool. Some of them Actually, most of them you have a pretty lengthy information session, which is good. You want to take notes during this and be paying attention because this is going to help you decide what school to go to. So remember that they're going to give you a lot of important information. A lot of it will be the same, a lot of it will be different. They're going to talk about different student resources they have, financial aid, and student life in general. And then they're going to move into the interview. And sometimes this happens at the very beginning, sometimes it happens in the middle, the end. Whatever it is, you will at one point be taken aside and be interviewed. So what do these interviews actually look like? It kind of depends. Like I said earlier, every school is a little different, but there's a general vibe that they're all going to ask you questions, so be ready for that. There's some that are panel interviews, and there's some that are more one-on-one interviews. The panel interviews that I had, and they were no more than 3 people in the room plus me. In that kind of a situation, you would have, yourself there, whether it's on Zoom or in person, and the 3 different people in the room would take turns asking you questions and responding to your questions. And then same thing in like a one-on-one. They would ask a question, you would answer, they would respond to the question. And this typically goes on for about 20 to 50 minutes, depending on the school. And I will say, pretty much every single school did point out 1 or 2 things from my application, and they asked me questions about it that were follow-up. So they said, oh, I saw that you did this and were the director of whatever, and can you tell us more about that? Or like, why did you include this? And that was kind of shocking to me because it helped me realize that, well, they actually read my application and they were looking at it right then as they were interviewing me. And so that was just like a really big, like, whew, for me, because I was so glad that I put in all the effort that I had into my actual interview to make sure it was presentable, didn't have any typos, errors, and it said exactly what I wanted it to say in a professional manner. And so keep that in mind as you're going into your application and your interviews, that they might pull things out of your application and talk with you about them. So don't just put stuff in there and like BS it. Like make sure you can talk about all of your stories that you put in there in your experiences section and in your personal statement. Now, during these interviews, there is one question that is the most important one that you need to be ready to answer at any school. This question is, why did you choose podiatry? And that question can be really intimidating if you aren't prepared for it. So please, please, please take time before your interview. If you're not going to do anything else, take time to get ready for that question because it will be asked. Now, answering this question can kind of make or break your interview vibe, and if you're flustered by this question, it might throw the rest of it off. So practice this, but don't make it like a rote memorization thing. You want it to flow. And so have some bullet points in your head that you want to talk about, but don't recite it word for word for like a monologue that you memorized. Now, answering this question, I would first start with a story, and it can be really simple and short. Because again, you don't want to spend more than 3 minutes max talking, or else your interviewers will start to lose focus. And so make this short and sweet, but also of substance, because you want to leave this interview with them remembering you and your story. And so first thing first, share a short story, even if it's just like 2 sentences. What I would recommend is starting with how you kind of discovered podiatry, or, the first time you realized, hey, I think this is for me. Whether that was shadowing a podiatrist, or finding an article online about podiatry, or breaking your ankle and then meeting a podiatrist who's gonna fix it. Whatever your short story is, keep it short and simple, and then transition that into why that matters for your life. Why you took podiatry over everything else. And this can be also pretty simple. You don't need to overcomplicate this. If you chose podiatry because you wanted to be a surgeon, but you wanted to have work-life balance, then talk about that. That's not weird. Talk about it. And make sure you relate to your life in a way that this is the career path for me. This is what I want above everything else. And this is why. Now, one thing that I would not do is to say anything negative about podiatry in any way. If you heard from your uncle's best friend that podiatry was like the way to be a fake doctor and it was easier, don't say that. I think that goes without saying, but first off, we are real doctors and we work just as hard. And putting any negative spin on the profession or on others is a red flag. If you do mention in a story anywhere in your interview, like having contention with someone or saying, oh yeah, like my boss was being super rude to me and so I had to overcome this challenge, don't put others in a negative light because that makes you seem negative and pessimistic. So that's another red flag tip there. Don't do that. But I feel like if you can follow that kind of regimen of quick story, tie it back to your life, why it's important, that will help you answer the why podiatry question, and it won't be too intimidating because they just want to hear from you honestly. And so share honestly why you want to do podiatry. It's an amazing profession and there's so much that it has to offer for all of our lives. So talk about it, get excited. This is your time to shine. So now that you've answered the hardest question, the rest is cake, right? They're gonna end the interview by asking you, do you have any questions for us? And I want you to ask a question because that shows that you were paying attention, right? And that you want to know what the school is about. You can typically kind of look on the school's website and look at their curriculum and the order of their classes and just general things about the school and the program, and use that as a basis to think of a question that you can ask. And then have a backup because maybe you have your interview at the end of the day and they do a bunch of information sessions with you. And then by the time you get to your interview, your question's already been answered that you had about the program or the curriculum. So have a backup question that's just kind of general about podiatry. I hope this video has been helpful. I know there's a lot of things going through your mind when you're going in for a medical school interview. I was definitely pretty nervous, and as I kept interviewing, it did get easier. So just keep that in mind. I would definitely say, just remember that the people interviewing you are people too, and they understand what it's like to be nervous and to stutter or make a mistake. So just give yourself some grace and try your best. At the end of the day, it'll work out, right? And so just take a deep breath and relax the best you can. Now make sure you watch the next video about what not to do at your interview and what to make sure you bring. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.